Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
In 2017, there were 19.7 million American adults who battled substance abuse in that year. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The numbers can be staggering. Opioid addiction has struck communities across the nation, even in rural areas once thought to be safe from the kind of epidemic seen in big urban areas. National Survey on Drug Use and Health found that 1 in 8 people have struggled with both alcohol and drug use problems. Meanwhile, the survey found that abuse and addiction cost American society more than $740 billion a year in workplace productivity, healthcare expenses, and crime. Take a look at the issue for this month. We have in our studio Vicki Lloyd. She's with the Somerset County Emergency Services, and also Mike Trader. He's with the Behavioral Health Services for Worcester County, and that's the health department. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
So let's just start with the fact that this is Going Purple Month. Vicki, tell me what that means.
Well, Somerset reigns purple. We don't go purple, but no, it's definitely purple. Purple is the color that is used to represent opiate awareness. And September is all about opiate awareness and recovery and just getting out there and breaking stigmas and, trying to bring people together with services that they might need, whether they're an addict or a family member or a loved one of an addict.
So what kind of things do you emphasize in a month like this? What kind of activities are out there that you...
There's a lot going on out there. Every county on the Eastern Shore is going purple this month. Mm-hmm. So for us, we were very active. We had a walk that started August 31st. We kicked it off with our walk, a walk of remembrance. We did both of the parades, the one in Crisfield on Labor Day and the one in Deal Island for the skipjack races. So we were right there with the public. We have our big community event coming up this Thursday. And we are going to be at Summers Cove Marina. And our law enforcement in the county is cooking for everybody. We have lots of prizes, lots of treatment providers, lots of people that are involved in the churches will all be there. Everyone, coming together, trying to get the community together and do a little healing. There'll be food, fun, games, music, and if the weather holds, a hot air balloon.
So Mike, what does it mean for Worcester County?
Well, Somerset being Recovery Month is just it's a time, I think, for all of us to stop and kind of pause and look at what's going on here, and to look at the folks who are suffering and the families of those who are suffering right along with them, and kind of pause and look at, what can we do to kind of make sure that this is at the forefront of our minds and make sure that we as a community are really focusing on it and tackling it together. Just this past Saturday, there was a recovery walk on the boardwalk in Ocean City, and like she said, the entire Eastern Shore is going purple. And so it's really, it's a time to really bring awareness and bring, again, people's focus and try to get some extra resources and attention to this problem that needs the attention right now.
So Vicki, are you think that people are highly aware of this problem? I mean, we hear a lot about it. We've heard a lot about it in the news, and the media, and so on and so forth. How much are people aware of it in terms of general, as opposed to their own personal situations?
I think that people sometimes, ignorance can be bliss. You don't really want to know that your neighbor or your friend or your loved one has an addiction problem. And so sometimes we dismiss it, they're this or they're that. And we don't always look out for everything that's going on around us, and we don't intervene quickly.
And we also have in our studio Debbie Smolin. She's coordinating events for the Purple Month. Tell me a little bit about the kind of things that you guys have been planning and doing over this month.
Great. Thank you for having us today. We have done several events already. We had our kickoff at the Shorebird Stadium. We are doing several events where we're painting rocks, and that is a project that was sponsored by the Worcester County Arts Council. We're going to be painting rocks with messages of hope and inspiration. Once we get all the rocks painted, we're going to put them in a river of hope that will be located at the Atlantic Club in West Ocean City. We're going to have an open house on September the 26th from 5 to 8 to dedicate that River of Hope. So we're hoping that a lot of community members come out. We've invited a lot of city and county officials to come out and support that mission.
So let me ask you, Mike, same question I asked Vicky, is how much do you think people are aware of this sort of in general, but when are they relating it to their own personal experience, do you think?
I think some folks are. I think that we still see a lot of stigma out there. So there are folks who have their personal experiences and their personal struggles, and then there are some folks who it's not hit them quite as close to home. And I think, there's some differences there in how the issue is perceived. And I think that's one of our battles as we're going purple and as we're really talking about it during Recovery Month is how do we combat that stigma and how do we get everybody on the same page and make sure that everybody really understands what a problem this is and that it's not, this isn't an issue that's affecting one class or one group of people. This is across the board. It doesn't matter who you are, where you are. It's hitting close to home. And, for those who haven't been personally affected quite as closely, odds are pretty good that they're going to know someone, and so it's a matter of how do we get there and how do we stop kind of put the brakes on this thing right now and start to kind of prevent future crises.
So Vicky, how did we get here? What kind of history are we looking at in terms of now all of a sudden we seem to be aware of the fact that this is a growing problem?
The numbers for the overdoses and the deaths have really risen in the past few years. I think in 2016 they really spiked and it drew some attention. And then we started looking at it and started seeing where it was coming from. It's coming from a lot of different places. Some of it is just experimental and they move past that and they move into a life of drugs. Some of it is coming from a medical procedure and they start taking medication and they end up getting addicted to them. And it's amazing the different ways that people get into this. You can't say it's their fault. There's just so many different ways that it happens, and I don't think anyone's immune. Maybe you personally aren't going to be using the drugs, but you might be the one enabling somebody else to do it.
What about you, Mike?
Absolutely. Like Vicki said, I can't tell you the number of folks I've talked to who their journey with addictions began with something as simple as a dental procedure or a minor surgery, and they were then prescribed opiates, and their body became dependent on the opiates. And that's kind of how they began. Everybody's journey is different. Certainly we see a lot of folks who have backgrounds, trauma histories, who, it led them to substance use down the road. So everybody's journey into addictions is different. And I think on the flip side of that, I think that helps us to understand that everybody's journey into recovery is also going to be different. And so looking at what works for one person may not be the thing that works for someone else. So which I think is why it's so important that we come together as a community and we really look at what are the treatment resources out there, what are the recovery resources out there, is it AA, NA groups, what are the things that we can do to wrap around folks as a community and make sure that their needs are being met so that whatever it is that they need to reach recovery, they have available to them.
I mean, is it principally deriving out of the medical experience? A lot of people talk about that, as opposed to simply just the kind of illicit drugs that, for instance, were, say, developed in the 1960s and 70s, which obviously drugs became popular then. Is it more a prescription issue, do you think?
It's again, we're seeing a little bit of both. So it's a little bit of both. And when you start talking about illicit drug use, what we're seeing now is very different than the types of illicit drugs that were out there in the 60s and 70s, much more potent. When we talk about opiate deaths, a lot of what we're seeing is fentanyl. It's so, where years ago, 20, 30 years ago, there was heroin out there. There's now fentanyl and synthetics and things like that. We're also seeing fentanyl being laced into other drugs. We're seeing fentanyl laced into cocaine. I haven't seen it locally, but I know I've heard of fentanyl even being laced into marijuana and different. So you have folks who are going out thinking this is the thing that I've used historically, not realizing that what they're getting now is something that's much more dangerous and much more lethal.
So, Vicki, in terms of what we do about this, I mean, are there a lot of programs then that have a hands-on? I mean, one of the traditional, obviously, we were talking before the show, the 1980s, there was a lot of emphasis on locking people up and so on, and the sort of law enforcement approach to dealing with drugs. Obviously, this has changed. Are we seeing more trying to get away from the law enforcement dimension and trying to get people treatment, do you think?
I think we've come to the point that we've recognized, it's a disease. Okay, it's something that has to be dealt with. And locking them up is not going to make that disease better. How did they get there in the first place? Do they have other issues going on that help them make that journey to where they are now? And if you don't address those, you're not going to get them out of that cycle.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Mike?
There is, a lot of really interesting data coming out of, if you look at some European areas, Portugal, for example, at one point had a very, very high rate of overdose. They also had very high rates of things like HIV and things coming from intravenous drug use. And they, some years ago, totally changed their tactics on the way they were treating it. They stopped treating it as a criminal problem and started taking folks and giving them opportunity to enroll in kind of rehab programs where they looked at job training and job placement. They looked at housing, and they really looked at how do we, rather than ostracizing folks from the community and making them criminals, how do we wrap our arms around folks and how do we bring them into the fold and make them feel connected? And there's a lot of data out there that's really showing that when folks feel more connected as part of a community and when they have sort of the ability to kind of build and create a new life, that's really where the recovery comes. There are some pilot programs going on in the U.S. right now that are doing this. I was just reading, I think it was Seattle a couple weeks ago, is getting ready to pilot a program such as that. And again, that's what the data is showing. And, it's for some of us, I think it's a little difficult because, we've heard of it as a criminal problem and folks should be locked up and all of this. But the data's not lying. And, the data's there that shows that if we want to turn this thing around, and both in a way that helps people, but also in a way, you talked about the financial impact that it's taking. There have been studies that have been done that have shown that the financial impact is lessened when we invest money into things that are helpful and that are kind of helping folks build new lives rather than incarceration. So it's an interesting time to kind of see sort of this change in tactic, I think.
So what should one look for when it comes to whether or not, say, a relative has a problem with drugs or anything, substance abuse for that matter? What do you think?
So I think, one of the big things I always tell people is look for changes. When you know someone and you've got that relationship and you kind of know what their baseline is, when you start seeing major changes, it's a sign that something's going on. And maybe it's substance related, maybe it's not. You don't really know until you kind of invest some time and you sit down with them and you start having a conversation. You start looking what's going on here. So there are things like that. When we talk about, I heard you talk about the financial impact on the workplace, and one of the things we've started is a program called Addictions in the Workplace, where we're going out, particularly into Ocean City and particularly into the hotel, motel, restaurant industries, and really trying to focus on doing some training for the owners and the managers there on what to watch for in their employees. And it's things like, is there someone who's typically been punctual to work and now they're late a lot, or they're missing a lot of work, or they're showing up and they're extra fidgety and they just don't seem themselves. Are they oversleeping? Are they undersleeping? Again, looking kind of for those big changes in folks is a sign.
So particularly in the work environment, it would seem to me that people might be reluctant to come forward to say that they have a problem, because if they have a problem, then likely they may not have a job. I mean, there's that overhang, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things the reason we're focusing on that industry is that the hospitality industry has shown extra high rates of substance use as compared to other industries. And so we're really trying to focus there. and look at that. And to some extent, it's been kind of normalized. And we're not just talking opiates, but also thinking about alcohol use in the restaurant and bar industries. If you think about the rate of substance use in those industries, it is much higher than in the general population. And so part of it is we're outreaching to business owners and managers is not, again, let's not necessarily look at this as a form of punishment, but how do we remove that stigma, and how do we help the folks, and how do we kind of get them back on their feet? Because what we found is that a lot of the business owners and managers would rather have those employees turn around and become productive employees again, as opposed to getting rid of them and having to restart and retrain new folks and things like that.
As a matter of fact, we interviewed a chef some time back, and she talked about particularly her early days in which, because of the hyperness of the job and the coming down after a very busy shift and so on and so forth, that it was a way to kind of like wind down from the job, as it were. So let me ask you about fentanyl. Because that seems to be a relatively new thing in terms of at least its spread. I assume it's been around for a long time. What's its origins here? Either one of you, it's fine with me. Mike?
I know fentanyl was created by the pharmaceutical companies as a pain medication. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. The body metabolizes it in much the same way, but again, I believe it's 50 times more potent. So it becomes that much more dangerous. We've seen folks, for years who, things like pain patches and things like that, and definitely has some legitimate uses. I know one of the things that we saw there were some prescribers who I think even lost their licenses because of sort of over-prescribing and things of that nature. And what we're seeing right now is the medical community is really kind of clamping down and getting much more careful about how much are they giving and for how long are they giving it, and things of that nature. And so part of the turnaround that I feel like we're starting to see is due to the medical community and the local hospitals really stepping up and really changing again their tactics on how they're addressing things, looking at, can we deal with the pain with other medications that are not opiate related, with other medications that are not as addictive. So we're starting to see the medical community really jump on board. Not starting; they've been doing it for a while now. But the changes that they're making have been a huge step in the right direction.
Yeah, Mike, I should ask because there's a number of settlements now going on with some of the pharmaceutical companies. How much responsibility do you think they have, or the medical establishment has, for all of this? Were they just not looking? What's your sense about it?
That is an awfully big question.
And the
answer is,
I think certainly the pharmaceuticals are always trying to keep up with the need, and it's always looking for what's the better thing. Because when you have someone who is truly, legitimately struggling with severe pain, you want there to be an answer for that, and folks want there to be a medication for that. The downside is I don't know that the pharmaceutical companies or that anyone really saw where this thing was headed, or how quickly something like this would get out of control and to what degree.
I want to turn to you, Vicki, because we were talking earlier about kids in terms of what they think about drugs, their perception of drugs. You described how you're trying to get them to move about and so on. What efforts are there made to try to get it, maybe at an early age, to teach them, hey, this is not necessarily a good thing?
Well, back in my day.
Yeah, well, back in our day, right.
We had DARE, but
Right.
That's not, it's still out there. It's just not as active in all locales as it was before. But you have to talk to the kids in different ways now. You have to find ways to reach them, because very often there's so much going on with the peer pressure and with their friends and everything else. And sometimes there's a lot of absentee parenting. Or maybe even their parents are having problems with addiction. And so you have to try and reach these kids in so many different ways. Just, open up to them, make it a very safe place for them to talk. Teach them one step at a time, tiny little things, reward them. I mean, we reward them with purple candy, go figure.
Right.
But it works. I mean, they keep coming back, and it's like, we have this spinning wheel that has questions on it. Can I answer another one? And they're just learning as they do it. So sometimes it's very simple things, but you are getting messages across.
And they're really receptive, you think?
They want the candy.
Well, maybe.
They are getting the answers right. So we know from when we started doing it to now, we've had to change the questions quite a few times just to stay ahead of them now.
Mike, in terms of, people grew up, certainly in the last decade, thinking that drugs were okay. We certainly had experience with many of them, and they grew up, and that particular generation still had a serious drug issue, but nonetheless, it seemed to disappear. Now this seems to be hitting a whole new generation. How aware do you think they are of what's going on around them, and whether or not that maybe this is not a good idea?
The young folks, you mean?
Yeah.
I think they're pretty aware, but I think as I think most of us did as teenagers, there's this Superman complex, the idea that it won't happen to me, right? I'll be okay. I know what I'm doing. I've got this, and so I think as adults, I think it becomes our job to really watch out for them and help them make right decisions and good choices. I think in addition to the education, there's also drug treatment. I know in Worcester County we're trying to start it younger and younger. We've got addictions counselors who go into all of the high schools throughout Worcester County, and even into some of the middle schools. We're starting to see the use younger and younger. Again, I think one of the other things that we can't miss is that propensity for addiction, I think, in a lot of cases is born out of trauma histories. And so really looking at what are some of the other things that our young folks are facing and how are we dealing with that, because if we focus only on the addiction, we're going to miss a lot of the issue there. So really looking at what are the things that our young folks are dealing with. How do we prevent trauma? And if different types of trauma do occur, how do we treat that? How do we get to the heart of that before it develops into something that we don't want it to?
What kinds of trauma are you talking about?
All sorts, really. When we look at trauma, it's so important that we realize that trauma is from the person's perspective. And so, one of the things that I do is I've done quite a bit of trauma therapy, and I'm certified in a model that works specifically with young folks with trauma issues. And it's anything from sexual abuse and molestation, bullying, growing up in households where there's domestic violence, any number of things, car accidents, because when folks go through trauma, it changes, and you can look at brain scans and things like this. It biologically, physically changes the brain and the way that the brain operates. And when that happens, the brain starts to look for things in a different way, and it develops then that propensity for addiction to substances, which is why, again, I think it's so important that when a young person goes through trauma, whatever that trauma might be, that we're working to reverse that before the addiction really takes hold.
Vicky, you're on sort of the coordinating end of this thing with your emergency services thing. How difficult is it coordinating all this stuff, or whatever programs that you need? Because obviously you're working with the health department there.
Hand in hand with the health department. But sometimes it's difficult because we don't always know all the resources, although health has a lot of them. But there's always outside agencies, independents, United Way, all sort of, coming up with different programs and things that are going on. So you're always looking for another opportunity to get another partner. We've partnered pretty heavy with Faith this year, the faith-based community, because they are a community upon themselves, and for them to they want to do something, and they want to take care of their own. So to have them as partners and teach them a few things that they can take out to their parishioners and share is really helpful. So, and we have a very close connection with law enforcement, with EMS,
Right.
with fire. So on the first responder side, we're hand in hand with them every day. So to bring all of these together has been really helpful.
So, Mike, if you find, if somebody finds that somebody's in trouble, what should they be doing? And especially if somebody looks as if they may have even overdosed, for that matter. What's
So there are a couple things. First, if it's let me address if someone's not overdosed first.
Sure.
I think the best way to do is call 211. So 211 locally goes to the Life Crisis Center. They are the local call center for the 211 number. But if you dial 211, they have folks there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who work to link you with the right resources. So if you're someone who's struggling, you can call 211 to help you out. If you have a loved one or a family member who's struggling, call 211 to help you out. They'll help you find recovery resources, treatment resources, whatever it is that the person might need. If someone is, has overdosed, certainly calling 911, because the first thing you want to do is get emergency services there. We're trying to teach everybody about the Good Samaritan law, because one of the things that folks get a little worried about is, if I call 911 and law enforcement folks show up, am I going to get in trouble for this? So the Good Samaritan law protects against 3 different things. It protects against possession of a controlled dangerous substance. So if you're in possession, you will not get charged with that if you're calling to get someone help. Protects against possession or use of paraphernalia. And protects against providing alcohol to minors. So, the message we really want to get out there is, if someone has overdosed, call 911, get the help, and don't be afraid that you're going to get in trouble. One of the other things that folks can do is they can get trained and carry Narcan kits. So if you have a loved one who's struggling with opiate addiction, you can get yourself a Narcan kit, and the pharmacies have these available. Most insurance companies are now covering it. I can speak for Worcester County. Folks can go to www.decisionsmatter.org and check it out. We are doing Narcan trainings on the 2nd and 4th Friday of every month, where folks can walk in. You get trained on how to recognize an overdose, what to do when someone is going through overdose, which gets into things similar to first aid, and CPR types of things, and then how do you give the Narcan? And then we're actually sending them out with a Narcan kit, which is it's a nasal spray that is a sort of a fast-acting counteractive to the opiate. So it buys you some time. It's similar to an EpiPen. If someone's having an allergic reaction, to use the EpiPen buys you some time. So that's another thing that folks can do to kind of be ready and be prepared and be ready to help someone if they do encounter someone with who's experiencing an overdose.
By the way, obviously that the governor, issued an emergency declaration about this issue. How helpful has the state been in terms of resources and coordination? Vicki, what about you? Have we seen anything from the state? I'm assuming we have.
They were actually down visiting
Right, okay.
about a month ago, and they've been to every county in the state looking to see what people are doing, what programs might be working, what sort of outreach is working, and to try and put together a plan so that we can all share our best practices. And, if somebody's missing something, then, hey, we've seen that this works with these situations. And, it's great because everybody's trying something different. Nobody really knows what works yet. We know some things that work, and they don't necessarily work for everyone. So to look at all these different ways that people are getting out there and making this happen, it's a good resource. And they've also put a lot of grant money out there that's going directly into this.
Mike, what about you? What have you seen in Worcester County?
There is a good deal of funding coming down from the state. So the state is really trying to, the governor, in addition to the emergency proclamation, also created an opiate task force years ago now. But there's, one of the downsides is, I think we're all, we were playing catch up because this thing kind of smacked us in the face, and I don't think anyone was ready for it or expecting it. And so there's funding coming out now for things like Narcan and Narcan trainings. There's funding coming out there to help new MAT services, that's medication assisted treatments, specifically for opiate use. There's money out there for that. Peer support. Peer support's a new thing that everybody's kind of talking about, and that we have here locally. We have peer support workers. Well, that's only funded currently through grant money, and the state's talking about making that some sort of a fee for service that would bill through insurance companies. But while they're working that out, the state is funding peer support workers, which is just a fabulous thing. I mean, the idea that to have folks who are in recovery themselves to be able to come out and say things in a way that that most of us can't come out and say, look, I know where you're at. I've been in a very similar place. this is how I got to recovery, let me help you, and just really give folks hope at a time that they might not have much hope for themselves. So I think, again, I think the state is really trying to do some good things around this, and both at the state level and also at the local level.
Debbie, I want to turn to you just briefly, sort of wrapping things up here. So what kinds of things are you guys doing in terms of the Purple Month, and how can people get involved with the kind of activities that you've got going
Well,
there?
with Worcester Goes Purple, and I also wanted to mention too that Wicomico County
Right.
is also going purple as well. So what we've done is just reach out to the community, and the support really has been overwhelming as far as the number of people that are involved, businesses, civic organizations, county governments. So we're lighting buildings up purple. We have businesses that are having purple days where they dress in purple. So there's just a huge outpouring of support, and there also has been a huge support from the recovery community. In Worcester County, we're working closely with the Atlantic Club in West Ocean City. And so I think one of the things that I learned personally was that people in recovery are very serious and genuine about giving back to the community that they really have taken from. So they're interested in volunteering. We had a walk for recovery on the boardwalk in Ocean City on Saturday. We had over 200 walkers. So that is something that we're spreading the message, and that really was our main goal this year, was to get the education, the awareness, and to let people know really what's going on, and to help really stop the stigma. It's been overwhelming for me to meet mothers who've lost children. I met someone on the boardwalk on Saturday. Her brother died less than a month ago of overdose. So just to be able to connect with those people and let them know that the community does care. We care about the families. We want to support the families as well as the people struggling with addiction.
Well, no doubt this will be an issue that will continue on, certainly beyond the month of September, and I appreciate you all stopping by. We've been talking with Vicki Lloyd. She's with the Somerset County Emergency Services. Also, Mike Trader. He's the Behavioral Health Services with Worcester County Health Department. Also, Debbie Smullen, who's in charge of Going Purple there in Worcester County. I appreciate you all of you taking the time to speak with me about this, I think, important subject. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.